Hello, I'm Bob Baker with the Schiller Institute and the Executive Intelligence Review News Service. I'm speaking today, this is July 22nd, from near Washington, D.C., with Kansas State Senator Mike Thompson, who is in Kansas City, in the heart of the Midwest Central States man-made electricity crisis. And Senator Thompson is a meteorologist who has had a long public career in weather reporting and now serves in the state Senate with, among other things, special responsibilities for utility policy and other functions in Kansas. Mike, please give us more of your background and give us a little bit on the situation report, what we would call maybe a summer version of the Texas freeze a year ago.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Bob. I really appreciate it. And my background is in meteorology. I actually went through the Navy weather schools. I served on an aircraft carrier. I got into television by accident. I fully intended to just work as a forecaster and provide operational forecasts, but ended up doing that also on television and radio for just about 40 years. I got into the Senate, and because of my background in weather and climate, I've always had kind of an interest in the utilities and the energy sector. I was assigned as the chairman of the Utilities Committee 2 years ago, and so I'm in my second year as a chairman of that committee here in the state. And we've got some big energy policy issues. A lot of it has been driven by the fact that there's been a steady disinformation campaign about the climate for decades. And now we're making horrible energy policy based on that, as you've probably seen recently coming out of the Biden administration. They're trying to limit CO2 emissions, which are unnecessary to limit. And as a result, we're having some major energy problems in the gas prices, and the increased price in natural gas, which is also driving up electrical rates because of the hot weather that we've had in the Central Plains lately, from Texas all the way up through the plains. We're seeing peak demand for electricity, more than we've ever seen, record-setting peak. And part of the reason that the Energy Information Administration is saying that we're going to see electric rates double, if not triple, across parts of the country is because the increased reliance on renewables, wind and solar. Because for those renewables to be viable at all, you have to have natural gas. Because when they are not available, you have to have peaking generation that comes online. That would be mostly natural gas generators that kick on. And the price of natural gas has virtually tripled in the last 3 years. And so the increasing reliance on the natural gas is driving up prices. The fact that we're exporting about 74% of our natural gas overseas is also putting pressure on the price here in our area. In Europe, they're paying literally 10 times more for natural gas than we are because they're out ahead of us on the mistakes by going whole hog with the renewables. And now we're seeing Germany trying to go back toward coal because they have energy poverty. They can't produce enough electricity, and that's going to be the case all across Europe. So that's kind of the situation now. We are starting to reap the whirlwind of some very bad decisions that have been going on for a long time. And unless we start turning this around very soon, we're going to see this sort of problem all across the United States. Well, we already are. Kansas is just a microcosm of that. And so, gosh, educating people on this is the real key, so that they understand where we're going wrong.
Yeah. Well, this is the recent, I don't know if this is reversed, Washington Post. The headline is Biden studies declaring climate emergency. I think that's in reverse. But anyway, so you're right. It's right here in ground zero. Mike, the evil narrative is that the current heat wave, the third year of drought in Western North America, automatically proves the thesis that the Earth is overheating from too much carbon dioxide. and other emissions that human beings and their activity do. So we have to shut down human activity. What's the real meteorological science people should understand?
Well, first of all, they're being fed so much bad information. I don't know if we have enough time today to debunk it all, but let me start taking it, chip away at the edges here a little bit. First of all, this heat wave is not unusual. It's not uncommon, and it's driven by largely the Pacific Ocean patterns that we have in place right now and the Atlantic Ocean patterns. There are multi-decadal patterns of abnormally warm and cold pools of water, and the locations of those pools of water, and they're vast areas of the earth, determine the general weather pattern flow across North America. And the one we're stuck in right now helps to amplify a big high pressure dome over the western part of the United States, which is locking this heat wave into place. Now, it really has not been a particularly hot summer over the northeastern part of the United States, and it's been a fairly rainy one over parts of the southeast. And this is a fairly typical pattern that happens, and these seawater patterns can be locked into place for decades, literally 4 to 5 decades. So it extends past the lifetime of many people who are not alive now. Younger folks don't remember the 1980 heat wave, and that thing was horrible. The 1936 heat wave was the worst out here in the plains during the Dust Bowl, where we had 53 days over 100 degrees in the Kansas City area. And at that time, by the way, carbon dioxide concentrations were only about 312 parts per million, where they're 420 parts per million right now. And I think the general misunderstanding is that, just because we are spewing emissions into the atmosphere, that it changes the climate. It has nothing to do with it. Sulfur dioxide is not a greenhouse gas. It does not trap infrared radiation. In fact, if anything, it blocks ultraviolet because incoming ultraviolet rays because of the size of the particulate matter in the molecule. Same with nitric oxide. Most of these things can affect the environment. We've done a lot to clean that up. And the primary greenhouse gas is water vapor. So if the climate alarmists were really genuine about their concern, they would be talking about limiting water vapor in the atmosphere, which we desperately need right now because many parts of the country could use some rain. Lake Mead, is at a dangerously low level because this pattern's been locked into place thanks to those seawater patterns for a long time. So it's a general misunderstanding of the difference between environment and climate and what actually drives the climate. One last comment on the carbon dioxide. I think people get the sense that CO2 creates a uniform blanket around the planet that traps heat, and that is not the case. It is not a uniform layer of carbon dioxide. It varies from place to place, and its effectiveness also varies with how much water vapor it has to compete against, because water vapor virtually takes care of about 95% of stabilizing the planet's temperature. So the outgoing long wave radiation is stopped by clouds, by humidity, by water vapor you can't necessarily see. And anything that water vapor doesn't capture, CO2 takes care of the rest. So it's a very minuscule and a very targeted bit of infrared radiation that it is temporarily absorbing before it re-releases it on its way back out to space. So it's a very complex relationship that a lot of people don't understand, but they think they do because they've seen tweets that they believe tell them everything they need to know. And correlation is not causation, and they get that confused as well. So there's so much disinformation, and it's so easy to mislead people these days because they see a video or they see something that makes them think they have a full erudition on the subject, and they don't.
The Schiller Institute has been very active for decades to mobilize to expose the anti-economic development nature of the green narrative and their agenda, which even has at its core those who want to depopulate the world. And in 1983, Lyndon LaRouche authored a book called There Is No Limits to Growth. For example, in recent years, the Schiller Institute has held conferences where there can be a dialogue over the science and not hysteria over climate change, so that especially young people can have the means to think things through. Do you think people are waking up to think things through? It's, for instance, in May, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation warned that there would be electricity outages. And did this jolt people into realizing what's going on?
I think that is going to be kind of piling on. I think the gas prices woke them up first. The seeing that we're paying. Well, I've paid as high as $6 a gallon out here in Kansas, where we produce petroleum. And I think that started to wake them up. And now you get these rolling blackouts and brownouts because of electricity. And I think that is a coming wave of realization. I wish I could say that everybody was catching on. I think some of the younger people, because of our education system, are skeptical still. And until they grow up a little bit and they get a little life experience, they may not truly understand what's going on. I think those who have parents who talk with them, who have intelligent conversations with them, who are engaged with them, those kids are light years ahead of those who just go to the public schools and the parents are disengaged. So I think that there's still a lot of learning curve to go over a large part of society. And even folks our age who have bought into that ideology are so invested in that ideology that talking facts to them is a real problem. I see that in the Senate. I see that in all over the place, on Facebook. You try to present people with facts and they don't even understand what those facts are trying to tell them, what that information, the relevance of the information. And so until we can get our education system up to snuff and get it away from what we've been doing for years, which is replacing true curriculum with social emotional learning, which is about 85% of the curriculum these days, where it's my facts are what I like and that's what I believe, and your facts are irrelevant because I don't like you. Until we can overcome that, this is still going to be a big hurdle for us, I'm afraid.
That kind of helped explain what happened at the Tower of Babel, maybe.
Yeah.
So I got we got on the track with this COP26 in Glasgow last year. And then they had COP25 in 2015. And these are major banksters. There's such as Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, who's got a rich experience in how to build stuff and construct stuff and build bridges and hydroelectric. I'm making a joke. We also had Sir Michael Bloomberg, anti-coal Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, who the Queen made a knight in the British Empire, and others that have worked to create an international green banker monopoly and mafia to get governments to enforce funneling money into these banksters' approved green projects, and then to sideline and choke off credit to sound energy sources such as nuclear power, coal, gas, hydropower, even fusion, which we should definitely do everything to get. How did this wave of coercion play out in the central states?
Well, it has been quietly infused into the economy out here through the ESG standards, the environmental, social, and governance standards that BlackRock and Vanguard, some of these giant venture capital firms are imposing. And by forcing investment into these green energy sources, and also through the investment tax credits and production tax credits coming down from the federal government. All of that has distorted the energy market, the supply and demand, particularly where the resources are going. And because these big companies, these public utilities, for example, are investor owned, they are beholden to the investor, not to the ratepayer. And so they are making investment decisions based on how they can get the quickest infusion of cash. And that comes through those highly subsidized sources of energy, with no regard to whether or not those sources are reliable or not. Here in the state of Kansas, we have 4,000 wind turbines right now. And on a day like today, where it's close to 100 degrees, we have virtually no wind. So we're all totally reliant on coal and natural gas today, and the little bit of nuclear that we have. And there's no sign that we're going to go toward reliability. As a matter of fact, the public utilities here are talking about retiring more coal plants. There are nuclear plants being retired across the United States. Palisades up in Michigan, probably one of the more recent. Diablo Canyon in California, they're retiring a couple of those. In ERCOT in Texas, they retired over 6 coal plants and went whole hog into wind with over 30,000 megawatts of wind down there. So in those locations, that's why they're having the rolling blackouts. They've replaced investments and immediate infusions of money into their system in favor of those unreliable sources, just because they get the very quick hit of money. So there's no incentive for them to do long-term reliability investments in the plants that are going to provide the base load for us going forward. And unfortunately, this has gone on far too long. We still have 6,500 more turbines projected across Kansas. And then the new push is towards solar, which is even worse. The capacity factor on all of these is very, very low. And the energy density is extremely low as well. The energy return on investment on the renewables is less than the Roman Empire got with their aqueducts. It's like 2 to 1. Whereas nuclear is 80 to 1. For every unit of energy you spend to create a nuclear energy source, you get 80 units of energy out. But it's 2 to 1 in the wind and the solar. So it doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make energy sense. But it's all driven by these ESG standards, by the sustainable goals set by the UN, by the production tax credits and subsidies from the federal government. And until we're going to have to get some help from Washington slowing this stuff down, because there's nothing I can do here at the state level to stop that malinvestment, unfortunately.
Wow, that's shocking. Just what you were saying about the windmills they're planning to put up in the future here, and all the pressure the legislatures are getting on that. And now the latest is trying to get the Iowa government to agree to a hundreds of miles long CO2 pipeline to capture and bury CO2 in the ground. I mean, this is pretty wild. What do you think about that?
I think it's the biggest waste of money you could ever possibly have. I mean, just think about this. The average historical CO2 level of the Earth is 2,600 parts per million. We are at 420 parts per million. At 420 parts per million, plants are actually still on a diet. The optimal CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is about 3 times higher than it is right now, somewhere around 12 to 1,300 parts per million. So reducing and capturing CO2 is an enormous waste of money and capital and expenditures that will have zero return on investment, zero impact on the climate, zero impact on anything other than creating right-of-ways for pipelines that don't need to exist, unfortunately.
Well, thank you, Mike. That's very good I mean, there's major shifts in the world. I mean, given the crisis of the famine, the pandemics, we're seeing this geopolitical fights, the sanctions that thousands of sanctions that are being put on, and this confrontations to go for a new framework for economic and security relations among nations. And, we at the Schiller Institute and Helga LaRouche has put out a call circulating, calling for an ad hoc committee for a new Bretton Woods fixed exchange rate system among the nations of the world, referring to this idea that we originally got through the FDR and others for development serving the world economic system after the war. And the Bretton Woods system, that was finally set up. It had a few flaws, but it did have fixed currencies and other features. And until that was dismantled in 1971, when the dollar and these other currencies were floated. And that's when waves of casino economics and crazy science came in and speculation. I mean, you take on this idea and the science and the economic features included. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a lot. Here we are at a position now where since 2008, I think the Fed has printed $100 trillion. And it's all because there's that currency is backed by nothing. So my concern is that the effort to use climate as this driver for reimagining energy and everything has been a long, slow plan to con Americans and the rest of the world into this sort of paradigm of financing and energy and everything else and control. And the Bretton Woods supplied some stability at a time coming out of the wars. The Weimar Republic situation with hyperinflation. Now we're faced with that in many places in the world. You look at Sri Lanka and the unrest they've got there, and you look at what's happening in the Netherlands, where they are killing the farmers because they're trying to reduce nitrogen emissions by 90 to 95%. This is all insane stuff. And so these are centrally planned people who want control of the entire global finance network. And restoring confidence in the dollar is going to be very, very tough when you've got profligate spending that's been going on for decades, and we're exporting huge amounts of inflation. So we've got to do something to try to stabilize the currency and restore confidence. And until Congress can rein it in, until the people realize that you cannot have a centrally planned economy, global economy, that's going to be a continued challenge, I'm afraid. I wish I had a good answer for that. I mean, I wish we could all go back on the gold standard and respect it. But that, Nixon took us off of that, and then we're in big trouble. Well, FDR actually started down that road. So this is a toughie. This is a tough one. But you're right. We've got to get this under control, because otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to end up with a digital currency, a global digital currency, where everything we do is tracked. Every purchase we make, every move we make, all our travel, how much energy we use, and then we'll be able to use that to control everyone and everything. That is my biggest fear at this point, and that's why, unfortunately, the young people are so used to using credit cards for everything. We've moved away from cash, and that's why I think there's also a push to regulate Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, because they see that as a potential rogue element in the global markets of currency. So, and there's been even some talk here of that in Kansas recently. We had a legislative post audit meeting, and I said, folks, we shouldn't be doing this, should not be doing this. So we've got to figure this out, but there's got to be some way to avoid a global digital currency avoid our sovereignty being usurped by a global currency, and people be able to hold on to their individual privacy rights.
Yeah, very, very, very well. Well, I mean, one of the things that's clear, had we built many of the water conveyance projects proposed 60 years ago, we would not be in this drought damaged situation. I mean, one in particular is the North American Water and Power Alliance, which would have diverted just a portion of the water that goes out towards the Arctic southward. And there was also other projects such as the Kansas Aqueduct, which would divert surplus Missouri water into Kansas, and that was never built.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where, if we establish, as Linda LaRouche said, a new national credit bank, so we got credit for these things, and we don't use the credit to bail out speculators. We put them in bankruptcy. And then we launch projects to really build a real economy. Now, that brings me to a very exciting element that I want to, that I just figure has made you very happy. And that's the James Webb Telescope. And I'd like you to tell us what you kind of think about that.
I've seen a little bit. That is an area that I don't pay as much attention to, but I saw some information on that recently, where they're looking back, at history, basically, when you're looking that far out into the universe and seeing some amazing stuff that the Hubble was unable to see. And I think that, interestingly, people don't realize how much the cosmos has to do with the climate of this planet. When our solar system has been in a dustier part of the Milky Way, it tends to increase hygroscopic nuclei that turn into cloud cover and increases the reflectivity, or what we call the albedo of the planet. And we tend to go into ice ages, and that happens every 12,000 years or so. So hopefully this information from this new telescope is going to give us more information about where we've been, where we're going. And I think, any new knowledge is going to be amazing, but not many people have connected those dots, unless you do that research, to realize that just what happens on this planet doesn't necessarily isn't the only influence on what we experience as humans, as weather and as climate. So I look forward to that, to see what kind of new research comes out of that.
Well, Senator Thompson, it's a real pleasure to have this discussion and have a discussion with a scientist who actually can put things in perspective in a way that's makes sense, and also scientists and a lawmaker, and that's taking, he's willing to take a stand, and we saw this recently in Italy. And also in Holland, where the scientists and people are taking a stand for the farmers to point out, what the heck, it's the same fight that we're seeing everywhere. And, science, you can't separate science and production.
No.
And so, Mike, I would like to really bring this to a close, but thank you so much for the discussion. And I know it's not been long, but you have laid out some very good, thought-provoking ideas that we're going to share with a lot of people.
I appreciate that, Bob. I really do. And I just one last statement, and that is, because of all these things, people can no longer afford to stand on the sideline. We have reached a critical stage in our economy and understanding of science and energy that people need to get engaged, and that's why I'm doing it. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you guys and everybody else.
Well, that's beautiful, and that's what you call statecraft, and that's what citizens of the republic have to be doing.
I agree.
Mike, I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
My pleasure, Bob.